What happens when he offered his bed to two exhausted Apache? But their father arrived with 150 warriors. Witness this unbelievable true inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under the scorching sun of 1872, a landscape so harsh that even the lizards sought shelter beneath the rocks. Tom Henderson wiped the sweat from his brow as he worked on repairing the fence around his modest homestead. He was a solitary man, a former cavalry scout who had chosen the quiet life of a rancher over the chaos of frontier towns. His nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and that was exactly how he preferred it. The afternoon was wearing on when Tom noticed two figures stumbling toward his property. At first, he thought the heat was playing tricks on his eyes, but as they drew closer, he realized they were real. Two young Apache girls, no more than 14 or 15 years old, were barely able to walk. Their clothes were torn, their feet bleeding, and their lips were cracked from dehydration. They collapsed at the edge of his property, unable to take another step. Tom's hand instinctively moved to the rifle leaning against the fence post. The Apache Wars had left deep scars across the territory, and trust between white settlers and Native Americans was virtually non-existent. Every newspaper screamed headlines of raids and massacres from both sides. His own brother had been killed in a skirmish just 2 years prior. But as he looked at these two girls lying helpless in the dust, Tom saw only suffering humanity. He approached cautiously, his rifle still within reach. The girls were conscious but too weak to speak. Their eyes showed fear but also desperate hope. Tom made a decision that would change his life forever. He holstered his weapon, scooped up both girls, and carried them into his small adobe house. Inside, Tom laid them on his own bed, the only proper sleeping space in his one-room home. He fetched water from his well, carefully helping them drink small sips so they wouldn't get sick. He cleaned their wounds with whiskey and bandaged their feet with strips torn from his spare shirt. The girls watched him with wide, suspicious eyes, but they were too exhausted to resist. Within minutes, they had fallen into a deep sleep. As darkness fell, Tom sat in his wooden chair by the window, his rifle across his lap. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into. The girls could have been fleeing from something terrible, or they could be bait for an ambush. The Apache were known for their tactical brilliance, but something in their eyes had told him they were genuinely in need, and Tom Henderson had never been able to turn his back on someone who needed help. The night passed slowly. Tom dozed fitfully, waking at every sound. The desert night was alive with the calls of coyotes and the whisper of wind through the sage. The girls slept soundly, their bodies finally able to rest after whatever ordeal they had endured. Dawn broke with the soft purple and orange hues that made the desert beautiful despite its harshness. Tom was preparing some cornmeal mush for breakfast when he heard it. The sound was faint at first, like distant thunder, but it grew steadily louder. Horses. Many horses. His blood turned to ice. Tom rushed to the window and felt his heart stop. Coming over the ridge were Apache warriors, at least 150 of them, maybe more. They rode in formation, their faces painted for war, rifles and lances glinting in the morning sun. At their head rode a man who could only be a chief, his bearing proud and fierce, his face carved from stone and weathered by decades of desert life. The girls stirred at the sound of hoofbeats and rushed to the window. When they saw the approaching warriors, they cried out in their language, their voices filled with emotion. Tom realized with cold certainty that these warriors had been searching for them, and the man leading them was likely their father. The warriors surrounded his homestead completely, cutting off any possibility of escape. Tom stood in his doorway, unarmed, his hands visible. He had made his choice. If he was going to die, he would die standing tall, not cowering inside. The chief dismounted and walked forward, his eyes scanning Tom's face, reading him with the skill of a man who had survived by understanding his enemies. The chief spoke in Apache, his voice like gravel. Tom didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a question, a demand to know what had happened to his daughters. One of the girls stepped forward from behind Tom, speaking rapidly to her father in their language. She pointed to her bandaged feet, to the bed visible through the open door, to Tom's empty hands. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Tom watched the chief's face, trying to read his fate in those dark, penetrating eyes. The other warriors sat motionless on their horses, awaiting their leader's signal. One word from him and Tom would be cut down where he stood. Then something remarkable happened. The second girl stepped forward and took her father's hand. She spoke quietly, tears streaming down her face, explaining something with great emotion. Tom caught only one word he recognized: agua, water. The chief's expression slowly changed. The hardness in his eyes didn't disappear, but something else appeared alongside it. Understanding, perhaps even respect. He looked at Tom's modest home, at the bandages on his daughter's feet, at the single bed inside where they had clearly slept while this white man had kept watch all night. The chief raised his hand and spoke a command to his warriors. They lowered their weapons. He then turned to Tom and spoke in broken English, words he had learned from traders and soldiers over the years. You give water, give bed, you no take. He gestured to his daughters. You protect. Tom nodded slowly. They needed help, he said simply. Any decent man would have done the same. The chief studied him for a long moment, then did something that shocked everyone present. He removed a necklace from around his neck, a beautiful piece made of turquoise and silver, clearly an item of great personal value. He stepped forward and placed it around Tom's neck. Through gestures and broken English, he made Tom understand that this was a token of safe passage, that any Apache who saw this necklace would know Tom Henderson was under the protection of the great chief's family. The warriors brought forward a horse, a magnificent paint that would be worth a fortune to any rancher. The chief gestured that it was a gift. Tom tried to refuse, but the chief insisted with a firm look that made it clear this was not negotiable. To refuse would be an insult. The girls embraced Tom before mounting horses brought for them. Their eyes, which had shown only fear and exhaustion the day before, now shone with gratitude. The chief extended his hand in the white man's gesture of respect, and Tom shook it firmly. Through that handshake, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended the hatred and fear that dominated the frontier. As the warriors rode away, Tom stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge. He looked down at the turquoise necklace around his neck and at the fine horse now tied to his post. But what truly amazed him was that he was still alive. He had gambled everything on a simple act of human kindness, and somehow, impossibly, that kindness had been recognized and returned. In the years that followed, Tom Henderson never had trouble with Apache raids. While his neighbors built higher walls and slept with loaded guns, Tom left his door unlocked. Occasionally, he would find gifts left at his property line: venison, woven blankets, or medicinal herbs. He never saw who left them, but he knew. The frontier was a place of violence and mistrust, where fear often ruled and compassion seemed like weakness. But on that morning in 1872, two exhausted girls, one simple act of mercy, and a father's gratitude proved that even in the darkest times, humanity could bridge the deepest divides. Tom Henderson's story reminds us that courage isn't always about fighting. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is open our door to someone in need, even when fear tells us not to.